My old dungeon master created a homemade world. It was pretty cool sounding, so my husband and I joined as we were nearing the end of a Curse of Strahd campaign. I'd come up with a really fun player character idea and ran it by the dungeon master. He told me it wouldn't be possible as we were all slaves to start with. Okay, so how are we going to do any kind of adventuring? He said that we would remain slaves throughout, but we would be selected to go on a quest that will fail. We would all die quickly because, as slaves, we wouldn't survive long out there on our own. Okay, weird. Needless to say, that campaign fell apart quickly. Then, he wants us to do a one-shot that he is writing where we, once again, are to be slaves, forced into gladiatorial combat. We would also start off with no items whatsoever, except tattered common clothes. Yeah, that sounds terrible, so we decline again. This one doesn't even happen. Now, he wants to revisit the world he created many years in the future, where we would all be, you guessed it, slaves. We will not be participating at all in this one, or any other he sets up. So why is he so obsessed with forcing player characters to be slaves? It's gross! I guess he's trying to replicate the Skyrim start, where you start with nothing.
Hey, you're finally awake.
But instead of gaining something, you just stay with nothing the whole time. We've read about this before, but it's usually DMs trying to force some kind of torture fantasy onto a fantasy race like tieflings or drow. At least this DM is doing it to everybody, so, I mean, it's still gross. Actually, you know what? Never mind. It's still weird. Stop doing this. It's dumb. To start off, we have a player. We'll name them Brandon, obviously not their real name. Oh, one of my players is named Brandon. Sorry, man. Anyway, he's very passionate about his backstory, which is a good thing. He just has a terrible case of what some would call main character syndrome, but he's naive about it. He tries to really make his character interesting and unique, but it doesn't cater to whether or not it makes sense. I, as the dungeon master, of course, do step in whether something goes too far or it just straight up doesn't make sense, and I've done this for our last campaign, but in our most recent campaign, it started getting worse. For some context, around session 0, everyone sends me their backstories, and I read over Brandon's backstory, and it's several pages. I included a disclaimer that for this particular campaign, it's a long-term dungeon, so backstory may not be important, and it'll be hard to include. I just wanted to make sure this was known to the players so that they don't feel like they have to give an essay of their backstory. And he's playing a sibling character with another player. All good initially, and I give them the thumbs up. The problems arise when Brandon is making a habit of continually interrupting others to make notes or imaginaries of previous scenes that have already gone by. Like, okay, if the party were at a bar drinking, 2 scenes later, now the party is in the town square talking to NPCs. Brandon would randomly interject and be like, oh, by the way, he drank deep ale during that scene. And this was particularly frustrating because we have a quiet/sly player. That's not what that says. Anyway, our shy player doesn't often get interacted with, but Brandon thought it was a good idea to interrupt that player's scene. Great. While annoying, no real lines have been crossed until he decides to edit his backstory mid-campaign without letting anyone know. His character is a half-orc, but decides to include that during his young age, his character is a human, but only grew his half-orc features later in adulthood, and changed the entirety of his character's upbringing around this transition. When the other player, who was playing his character's sibling, noticed this and took issue with it, Brandon tried to gaslight them into thinking that it was always there, and that I personally approved it. I'm no biology master, but I don't think that's how growing up as a half-orc really works. I get told the problem, and I sort it out with him in DMs, in terms of, if you're born a half-orc, you look like a half-orc. And at most, he tried to weasel his way out of it by saying that maybe he had recessive features that made him look mostly human, but I said, even if his half-orcish features are recessive, he'll still look like a half-orc. And with that, we seemingly reached a compromise of sorts, and we sorted this all out. After the third session, however, in voice chat that I wasn't a part of, he talks about his character's upbringing again, as a human and transitioning into a half-orc, as if it has been a decided thing. When other players who are hearing this for the first time express concerns and how, you know, they don't think that's how it works, Brand drops the, oh, the Dungeon Master is fine with it, we talked about it, and as you expect, I get a mob of messages in the morning. The player who played their sibling character has already left the campaign because of Brandon's lack of ability to cooperate with others, and the remaining players are also threatening to leave if they think this is how, and I quote, I allow things to run. I had to explain to them the whole situation above, and that that's not how we agreed on doing things. He's doing things behind my back at this point, but it's not enough for them. So yeah, a fun campaign that I spent months prepping for is going down the drain, and I'm already in the process of calling it quits, since the players have stated that all of this has ruined the campaign for them. Like I said the first line, while this is ongoing in a sense, the campaign is pretty much done.
One eternity later.
Update! Thank you to so many of you for commenting and giving me what I need straight to me. I will admit, I'm not great at confrontation, but with the urgency that all of you gave me, I put together a message for Brandon. I tried to be as light about it as possible since he is still new to D&D, and I'd hate for this experience to make him stop playing D&D altogether, whilst still giving him room to grow after what he did wrong. I told him what he did wrong. You know, the gaslighting of the other player that played his sibling, lying behind my back about what I really said, and working on better communication with the other players if he's going to be changing aspects of his backstory mid-campaign, especially if that backstory is tied in with another player's character. And I hoped to be on a somewhat okay basis with him, despite, kicking him out of the game. Unfortunately, he didn't take it too well. He tried to argue that the player who played his character's sibling shouldn't have made a big deal out of it. I tried to reiterate that if his backstory involves another player's character, it is a big deal, but then he gave off paragraphs of cursing me out, and about how D&D is a place for escapism, and he shouldn't have to worry about all of this. I can send logs if people are curious. I kinda am, but also kinda not. At that point, I promptly kicked, unfriended, and blocked him on every platform possible, and recommended my friends and players do so as well. Problem is, we do know Brandon IRL, so hopefully it won't escalate any further. Let us know how that goes, but seriously, good luck with getting this dude out of your life. At first, I thought this was a mild one. The main issue was Brandon's incompatibility with the rest of the party. Him wanting to have a recessive half-orc isn't really that big of a deal to me. However, the gaslighting, the lying, all that's not okay. Even if that behavior is involved in something that's rather minor, it's still a big warning sign for things to come because normal people don't handle situations like that. And then, when you bring up any sort of confrontation, their immediate freakout, that's showing the true colors. Brandon is right, this is a game, it is about escapism, but he's got it the wrong way around. They're not ruining his fun, he is ruining the fun for everyone else. And that's why he's gotta go. I'm prepping a D&D game, but there's just one last thing I need. The perfect map. But finding one is just so difficult. I mean, there's so many talented cartographers out there. Searching through even one of their libraries could take me hours. If only I had a cartographer who prioritized not just making awesome maps, but making them easy to use. Thank God for CzePeku. This video is sponsored by CzePeku, back again to show you guys why they have some of the best TTRPG maps on the market. When you subscribe to CzePeku, you get access to their entire catalog of maps, and that catalog is constantly growing. Just recently, they released this incredible monster arena with a variant that has a giant slime slowly filling up the area as the battle progresses. You can build an entire session around that concept alone. That's what you get from CzePeku. You get ideas, you get creativity, and put simply, you get incredible maps for your players to play in. With the sheer volume of high-quality maps and literally thousands of variants, it can be really hard to find what you need, but luckily CzePeku still has you covered there because they just revamped their website, making it much easier for you to search through and find exactly what you want for your session. Whether you're starting out in a simple village or going to the branches of the world tree, these maps have you covered, and you can get the base variants for them starting at just the $1 tier, with all of the variants at the $5 tier. If you're interested, you can head down into the description down below where you can find the CzePeku Patreon, and you can subscribe starting at just the $1 tier. As always, supporting our sponsors does support us. Thank you so much, CzePeku, for sponsoring this segment of today's video, and without further ado, I'm going to turn back into an animated rat so we can get back to the video. So this has been a recurring thing for over a year now. I've been DMing for my group of friends for over 2 years. We've gone through 2 campaigns and are about a quarter of the way through our current campaign I've dubbed Reign of the Cinder King. Cool name. The notable characters in the story are me, the Dungeon Master, the Druid, my girlfriend, and Wizard. There's also a Fighter, Ranger, and Paladin, but they aren't integral to the story. Anyway, we all started playing Dungeons & Dragons together after a coworker proposed a campaign to us, which eventually fell apart, but led to me taking the reins as the forever DM. After DMing 2 campaigns and trading out some players, I decided to run a classic fantasy campaign where a big evil dragon is trying to take over the world, Lord of the Rings style, and the party has to unite 5 kingdoms to destroy him. Right out of the gate, in character creation, I ask for everyone's characters to be of little importance to the world at large and lay out rules and such as usual in session 0 and leave everyone to make their characters. Everyone comes to me with some interesting and grounded characters and I'm liking where they're going with it until my girlfriend shows me her character. She's made a Shifter Stars Druid who was supposed to be the leader of a Fae court in one of the Fae kingdoms that had left her court in order to explore the world. I was put off by this and explained my reasoning as to why it was a little bit too much for the campaign in mind, but she was adamant, so I relented and negotiated her down to a small minor court instead of a major one. Satisfied? We get to playing. The first red flag reared its ugly head when Druid would non-stop complain about the limitations of her class choice. Every session, she'd whine and make it known how she despised the Stars Druid inability to do Moon Druid wild shapes and would argue endlessly as to whether or not Druids could wear metal armor. I chalked this up to her getting used to a new character, but she would just not stop complaining. Eventually, I sat down with her, and we talked about it, and after a while, we seemed to have figured it out. It was just new character syndrome, and she wasn't used to it yet. I thought that would be the end of it, but what a fool I was. It was good for a while, but then red flags started creeping into the edges of my vision, like the shadow people after I stayed up way too late. Whenever anything didn't go her way, she'd get upset and pout for the rest of the session, and I mean anything. Failed perception check? Pout. Rolled low on initiative? Pout. Enemy succeeded a single saving throw? Pout. Once an action of hers didn't work or turned out in a way she didn't like, she'd try to take it back or try something else, only to pout even harder when I told her she can't do that. It was non-stop and it was annoying to everyone. So I sat down with her again and explained that the game won't always go her way, that failure is a part of the game, and sometimes things won't go the way she wants them to. The dice have ones on them after all, and she agreed and told me she'd do better. We had that same talk 4 more times after that. Each time, she'd promise to do better only to be right back to her same old behaviors the next game. Any rulings I would make that didn't favor her would be met with backhanded comments in the moment, and then a barrage of frustrating quote-unquote criticisms after session. For a long time, I naively thought she was just venting out her frustration with my ruling and let her verbally degrade my DMing ability because I'm a very tolerant person who believes everyone's feelings are valid most of the time. And I love her, but eventually I clued in and started to notice other red flags too. Outside of session, she would demand ridiculous things for her character and the NPCs in her backstory and get really upset with me for saying no. Sometimes these demands were for her character from a campaign we finished years ago and were along the lines of, this villain shouldn't hate my character because I don't like it. She would also meta information on the campaign constantly, and because I thought she was interested in my world, I obliged, but it turns out she was only using that information to metagame and try to get the upper hand. Eventually, I realized it and started refraining from telling her extra information because it wasn't fair to me or the rest of the party, and she got mad at me again. Once again, I brushed that off foolishly too. This lady, man, oh my god. So, how did the session go? Oh, it went amazing. It was just phenomenal. Honestly, I don't know who I'm gonna give the rose to. All of my players are just so awesome, and we all have just such a great connection, but right now, I'm thinking about Rogue. I mean, they just are really special. Rogue? Really? Typical. I mean, I'm clearly the better player in the house. I mean, of all the options to give a rose to, why not pick me? I mean, for starters, I'm their actual girlfriend. I mean, I'm the clear choice just because of that. Really, they should be favoriting me in everything. I mean, I know they're not supposed to do that, but they should anyway. Well, what do you contribute to the game? Do you think you should just get the rose because you're the DM's girlfriend? No. Are you kidding me? Besides, I do so much more for the game. I keep the dungeon master in check by making sure to be constantly critical of them. I'm always giving them extremely constructive feedback to make the game better. I mean, I don't see how people aren't understanding my constant contributions to giving the DM horrible imposter syndrome. Don't you think that's kind of toxic? Wait, hold on, wait, I didn't mean to offend, hold on! It all came to a head when the party had to destroy a vampire count in a theater and had an ally plant explosives under the stage. The vampire was supposed to go on stage at the end of the play as they sponsored the production.
Guys, we want to take a quick break to thank the sponsor of today's episode,
Dracula.
Anyway, yeah, sorry. The vampire was supposed to go on stage and give a bow, and that's when the bombs would go off. However, the vampire knew the party were coming to kill him. So, he sent an illusionary duplicate onto the stage and baited the party's trap. After the explosion and seeing the illusion flickering out of existence in the smoke, the druid erupted in anger, standing up and telling them it's the worst thing a DM could ever do, that it was a sucker punch to the gut for ruining their cool moment, and I probably would have agreed with her had they not used a similar tactic against the vampire allies in the previous session. Hence, why he knew it was coming. But that was the tipping point for me. I closed my laptop, folded up my DM screen, thanked everyone for coming, and ended the session there. And not long after the session, the wizard texted me asking if I'm okay, and after explaining my emotions, he agreed with me and said that my girlfriend has been ruining a lot of the fun for everyone, and even suggested we take a break from D&D for a bit. This happened only an hour ago, and I needed to vent and rant. Even if you don't make a video off of this, thank you for reading it. I love your videos as they keep me sane through my workday. In your opinion, what should I do? Well, I don't want to tell anyone that they should have a breakup over a board game, but at the very least, you do need to talk to your girlfriend about this behavior because it's not appropriate for a romantic relationship at all. Look, as somebody who has very, very, very little to no experience with romance because of, I find that people tend to tolerate more crap from their romantic interest than they do from other people, but I feel like it should be the opposite. If you want to spend the rest of your life with somebody, if you want to share your existence with them, they should meet a bit of a higher standard, and that standard is, at the very least, not being extremely rude. Look, I'm not saying you need to get along all the time, but you're telling me that she degrades and demeans your DMing style, something that clearly matters to you? That's not very nice of her. Not to mention lying to you about the metagaming, trying to be the main character. Obviously, these are all game things. I have no idea what she's like outside the game. Maybe she's an angel. But this behavior does affect you, even if it is in a game. It also will merit some reflection on her out-of-game behavior. How does she act in just your day-to-day life? Because if she acts like this, that is not good. Again, I don't think you should break up with someone solely over a D&D game. Of course not. But, like I said, if this is bothering you, you should talk about it. So this campaign takes place about 2 years ago with me as a first-time Dungeon Master and 6 other players who we will refer to as their classes: Wizard, Cleric, Warlock, Barbarian, Fighter, and the star of our show, Druid. This was my first ever time running my own campaign after playing a handful of times, and I made an almost entirely homebrewed world that, admittedly, was not very well thought through. And of course, I made a lot of DMing mistakes. So I think maybe some of the Druid's actions were a result of my own unfortunately low skills as a DM and how I handled conflict resolution. But with that out of the way, here we go. The campaign started fine. More than fine. Actually, the summer before our college started up, I use a lot of homebrew monsters, mostly from the Monster Hunter Monster Manual I found online for most of my encounters. And the Druid was the only other person who had ever played those games at the table, so reasonably, they were really excited when I said they could absolutely use their wild shapes to turn into these homebrew monsters. They escape from prison, make their way through the plane to the continent I made, and a few sessions in, I threw a monster from the homebrew manual at them. I was still learning exactly how to balance encounters, and honestly, I still am, and my players varied a lot in terms of experience, from only having played once or twice to having run multiple campaigns themselves. Our Druid was somewhere in the middle, didn't really know too many of the nitty-gritty rules, but had run a campaign I took part in a year prior. During this battle, Druid wild shapes into a Lagombi? I'm not gonna look it up! Anyway, it's a CR3 rabbit wombat monster from the tundra. Now this is where I totally messed up. The players were level 5, and Druid should not have been able to wild shape into that high of a challenge rating creature. So that was a total whoops on my part, but I digress. As I mentioned earlier, I was still learning to balance encounters, and since I had 6 whole players, I often threw higher than average challenge rating monsters at the party because I knew they could dispatch them without too much trouble. This was the case with this particular monster, and it had resistance to non-magical attacks, thick hide or something, I don't know. So in the form of a Lagombi, Druid excitedly attacks with the Lagombi's multi-attack, hits all 3 times, and rolls for damage. Now we had established that the monster they were fighting had resistance, and therefore would take half damage. But the Druid, with a smug grin on their face, says, nope, they're gonna take full damage. How could they? I asked back, because now I'm wondering if I had, overlooked something. Because my wild shape attacks count as magical. Cue the furious flipping through the game books and rigorous typing as almost everyone looks this fact up, with some of the more experienced players shaking their heads. Circle of the Moon Druid, which this Druid was playing, get Primal Strike at level 6, which makes their attacks count as magical for overcoming these resistances. But as I mentioned before, they were level 5. So we try to explain this, saying that no, not until the next level will Druid get this feature, and the smirk drops from Druid's face as they sink into their chair. For the rest of the combat, they would roll their eyes when it came to their turn, loudly exclaiming, well, it's not like I can do anything anyways, as if not being able to do full damage was somehow the end of days. Later on, in another combat, Druid was in melee, acting as the front line, along with the fighter tanking hits. One of the monsters crit against Druid, and the way we do crits is by taking the max of the damage die and adding that to the roll. So 2d6 plus 2 would be like 12, plus 2d6 plus 2. Maybe that's a stupid way to explain it, but I know other tables do it differently, and I don't know how common our way is. Maybe that sounds overpowered, but that's how the crits work for both my character and the party's. So it wasn't like one of us had the advantage over the other, but it was enough damage to drop the Druid's wild shape, and they lost it, going on and on about how unfair it was that they had lost what made their character unique. I said that it made sense considering that they were wild shaped into a large creature, tanking hits. Circle of the Moon Druids are tanky for a reason, often being placed in the front line because they can tank hits. They still had more wild shapes left, so I suggested they pick a monster that had a range attack so they wouldn't be in melee. But they did not like that answer either. They said that no matter what I pick, you're probably just gonna crit again. I asked what they would like to do at this point. Like, do you just want your character just not be hit? Like at all? Yeah, why not go after the wizard? Because the wizard is currently hiding in a crate. Why would my monster go searching for them instead of attacking the ones it can actively see? The wizard has less health than me. It would be an easy kill. This creature isn't very smart and it's terrified right now. It just wants you guys to leave it alone. It's not like a bloodthirsty monster. But that's how they act in Monster Hunter. Dude, even those monsters will flee and limp away. Like, what are you even talking about? Pause for Crispy commentary. Oh my god. So recently I had a session where I crit a player 3 times during that game, and the player ended up not even batting an eye at it. He had bad luck and he just accepted it at that. He took his cards and he ran with it, and we ended up having a great game because of that. I can't imagine what would have happened if he had a freak out over it. Look, sometimes the dice aren't going to favor you. Sometimes the DM's going to roll well, just like how sometimes you're going to roll well. Man, it's just like the last story with the last Druid. This isn't Baldur's Gate 3. You can't hit reload save. Sometimes the dice are not going to be in your favor, and I think some people need to learn to be okay with that. So that was red flag number 1. When I run my campaigns, I like to have lots of opportunities for roleplay. Combat isn't an afterthought, especially for the games I run now, but at the time it kinda was. And my players knew this going in. So I had asked my players to create characters that they knew they could get invested in. Ones who would crush them if they died. Not that I planned to kill anyone, but I wanted there to be a connection with these characters. Druid had made an actually really interesting backstory for theirs. We had worked together to fit them into my mythology, making them the descendant of a sun god, and they were thrilled to play it. But the moment the game started, the most I got from Druid was, heh, I'm gonna eat Fighter's cigarette. A big aspect of their character was that they had never really interacted with people prior to this. So anytime another character would try and engage with them, they would either ignore them, try to move attention to another player, not a terrible plan, or worst of all, state, well, I don't know how to interact with people, so I insert morally reprehensible act here. The amount of NPCs that got punched in the face, the amount of people who couldn't break through the Druid's shell, and the amount of NPCs who got groped or otherwise touched inappropriately was starting to pile up. I tried to talk to Druid, letting them know, hey, Please stop doing this. It's making everyone uncomfortable, and I don't want to keep having to roleplay uncomfortable characters because they just got invaded. I don't think there's anything wrong with playing a jokey bit character. My definition of jokey and your definition of jokey, very different definitions. I played a fair few of these characters myself, and they're often my favorite to play, but I would have loved to know that this is what Druid was planning before I ran my semi-serious campaign about a world afflicted with plague that corrupted the minds and bodies of those affected, while the gods that had previously kept the world in check had started to turn on those that worshipped them. One time, I was talking with another player in a separate room with the door closed who had brought up after a session that the druid's actions were making them really uncomfortable, and this is where my conflict resolution skills, or lack thereof, failed us. And so I told them I agreed, and we were trying to come up with ways to overcome this. My phone pings, and it's a text from Druid that says, "I hope you're not talking about me right now." Not creepy at all. I couldn't even, understand how they knew. How did they know? Yeah, man, it's probably nothing. I'm just worried that... Oh, sorry, I've got a text message. Okay, what the...
I hope you're not talking about me.
No! How do you know? How did you know? But this problem, which had continued to grow, finally came to a head with one of the other players, Warlock. As I mentioned, I want players to have an emotional connection to their characters, and Warlock, oh boy, they delivered. Their story more or less boiled down to a classic noble, shunned by the circumstances of their birth, child of a noble, born out of wedlock to a mistress that the father wanted nothing to do with. But with the help of their patron, the Warlock is trying to lie to keep up this noble facade, posing as nobility despite knowing it's all deception. This aspect reflected the imposter syndrome we've all felt, and that Warlock notably went through themselves. They told me they were really happy with this, and I was happy too because this is what I wanted. But there is one person who was not happy with this, and that was Druid. Druid had some strained relationships with two other players, Cleric and of course Warlock, and they did not like the fact that Warlock was playing a liar multiple times throughout multiple sessions. Whenever Warlock would interact with an NPC or another player, Druid would interrupt and yell at them in and out of game for doing so. They never rolled insight or perception or anything that would clue them into the lie that was going on, nor did they ever ask. As a character who had no previous interaction with people, it wouldn't make sense for them to just instinctively know what was a lie and what wasn't. The best example of this was when the party was confronting a woman and her child after the player had discovered her husband's body a few floors above. They were situated in a dungeon/bastion that had been attacked by the monster, and the civilians were hiding in the bottom floor. Warlock lied, of course, letting the terrified and panicked woman know that her husband was okay. This seemed to calm her and therefore calm the survivors around her, but Druid butts in. "He's lying. Your husband is dead, devoured by the raptors." Oh god.
Clever girl.
So the woman and child obviously lose their mind and panic ensues. "Why would you do that?" Warlock asked. "Because my character thinks that lying is bad, and so do I." Right, but that woman did not need the truth, not at this point. "She's better off knowing now." "She doesn't look very better off." "Yeah, well, I don't like that you're a liar." One of the other players pipes up. "Guys, this is not real. This is all fake, and the lie wasn't affecting a real person." "But Warlock is still a liar." "How do you even know I'm lying?" At this point, it clicks. Druid. Warlock might have lied, but it's not like player and Warlock are interchangeable. Wizard is right. This isn't real. Druid looks at us with wide eyes, an expression that says, "Whatever you say, I know I'm right." I genuinely believe that Druid thought because Warlock was playing a personal character, then that means that Warlock's player was a through-their-teeth liar. That means that every time they interact in real life, it was Warlock that was hiding something, lying to get their way and manipulating everyone around them. The argument subsided, and I ended the session right there with a headache. And so, unsurprisingly enough, the campaign fell through. Druid left a few sessions after that argument after falling in love with the sun god, who they were a descendant of, so I'm not really sure where to begin with the implications of that. But I know exactly where to begin. It was like the group was finally able to breathe, but the aftershocks of the Druid causing more strife between the Warlock and Cleric and the other two party members, it just simply became way too much stress to deal with on a weekly basis. Now I'm running a campaign again, one that remixes the old story, so all that work didn't go to waste after all. And one of my players is Warlock, who is playing, ironically enough, A druid. Oh my lord, I rejected Holson the other day, and I suppose the world has just been fit to saddle me with a bunch of Druid horror stories. Seriously, Druids, what the heck is going on out there? It wasn't the Sweet Home Alabama or the inappropriate touching that put this game out of its misery. It was an inability to separate character from player. Now sometimes that lack of separation is going to be inevitable. Sometimes someone does something that makes you uncomfortable in character. It doesn't matter if it's what their character would do. It still sucks. But the irony is, Druid is doing plenty of things that would make somebody very uncomfortable, and yet they're levying that charge against Warlock, who is doing something that doesn't make anyone uncomfortable. In fact, it is a perfectly logical action taken in that scenario that Druid wants to ruin for, well, interestingly, it might be character bleed in the other way. Perhaps Druid just doesn't like Warlock in general and wanted any reason to dislike their character. Honestly, though, it doesn't really matter. This Druid was not good for your game, and I'm glad you found a different game with, now, a better Druid. Sorry for all the Druid hate, but despite that, that's a wrap on today's episode. If you guys enjoyed them, please do leave a like. If you want to see more of our content, then you can check out our Q and Play series where I answer your questions in a rambling unscripted format while playing some video games. We just released a new episode. It's linked in the cards. And while you're there, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down in the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment. Dang it, Druids, to let me know you made it to the end of the video. Hey, by the way, if you have your own horror stories, you can send them directly to us. There is an email linked in the description down below. Send your stories to us for a chance to be featured in one of these videos. But hey, even if you don't have any stories, in essence, like, comment, subscribe. We will see you all next time. Farewell. No! How did you know? How did you know? What is this? How did he know? How did he know?